Case 1. The Invisible Prisoner. Julia Eason. Julia Eason was 6 years old. At that age, most children are learning to read. They talk about classmates. They ask simple questions about the world around them. Julia was a daughter, a sister, a child who relied entirely on the adults in her home. On May 26, 2023, in the early hours of the morning, emergency services were called to a 12th floor apartment inside the Forest Houses complex in the Bronx. It was around 4 a.m. Julia's mother, Linnea Eason Kumar, reported that she had found her daughter unresponsive. When responders entered the apartment, they quickly noticed conditions that raised concern. The living environment showed clear signs of long-term neglect. The situation did not appear sudden. It did not resemble a single medical event. Julia's body suggested prolonged deprivation. She appeared significantly underdeveloped for her age. Responders also observed indications that her movement may have been limited over extended periods. This was not an isolated moment. Julia was transported to Lincoln Hospital. Medical teams worked to assist her. She died shortly afterward. She was 6. Authorities immediately recognized that this case involved more than one child. Inside the apartment were 2 siblings, an 8-year-old brother and a 3-year-old sister. Both children were removed from the home for protection. They showed signs consistent with prolonged hardship. There were untreated skin conditions, physical indicators of neglect. The pattern extended beyond one child. Over the following months, investigators worked to piece together what had been happening inside the apartment. In April 2024, the Bronx District Attorney's Office announced formal charges against Linnea Eason Kumar, including second-degree murder. Medical findings were direct. The medical examiner determined that Julia's death resulted from sustained physical restriction and unsafe positioning that interfered with normal breathing. Sustained, not sudden. Investigators uncovered additional details inside the apartment. A closet had been used as a space of confinement. It was not for storage. It was where Julia was repeatedly placed. The space limited her ability to move freely or remain in a safe position. Confinement inside a home can be hard to detect from the outside. Doors close. Life continues. But records showed that there had been prior contact with social services. Concerns had been raised earlier. Educators had reported hygiene issues and unexplained marks on Julia's older sibling. Those warnings did not result in immediate intervention. The system had seen the family, but it did not stop the pattern. When a child's world becomes smaller over time, when movement is restricted, when growth is delayed, when silence replaces normal behavior, those signs matter. Isolation inside a home can look like discipline. It can look like privacy. It can look like a family handling its own struggles. But repeated physical restriction is not discipline. It is danger. Julia's life narrowed inside the very place meant to protect her. Her siblings showed similar signs of hardship. The pattern was visible, but it required action. In this case raises difficult questions. When educators notice changes, what happens next? When agencies make contact, how closely is the follow-up tracked? When multiple small signs appear, who connects them? Julia did not have the ability to explain what was happening. Children depend on adults to speak for them. They depend on systems to respond when concerns are raised. In this case, those responses were not enough. Confinement does not always leave visible marks at first. Neglect does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears in growth charts, in hygiene concerns, in behavioral changes, in repeated isolation. When those signals align, they must be taken seriously. A child cannot protect themselves from restriction inside their own home. In April 2024, when the legal system addressed criminal responsibility through the charge of second-degree murder. But legal action comes after loss. It does not restore a childhood. Julia Eason's story is not just about a single night in May 2023. It is about what came before that night. It is about the months of confinement, the restricted movement, the signs reported earlier, the opportunities for earlier intervention. When warning signs appear in patterns, they should not be dismissed as minor or temporary. They ask for attention. Julia was 6. Her world should have been expanding. Instead, it was reduced to a confined space inside a Bronx apartment. Her story forces a clear lesson. Silence inside a home does not always mean safety. And when a child's life begins to shrink, physically, emotionally, socially, that is not a private family matter. Yeah, it is a call for protection. Case 2. The boy behind the blog. Garnett Spears. Garnett Spears was 5 years old. At that age, most children are preparing for kindergarten. They carry backpacks that feel too big for their shoulders. They talk about cartoons. They smile without effort. Garnett had a wide gap in his smile. He loved Star Wars. He was described as curious and expressive. To the people who met him in person, he was an active little boy. To thousands of people online, he was something else. He was presented as medically fragile. His life was documented through social media posts and a personal blog titled Garnett's Journey. His mother, Lacey Spears, shared updates about hospital visits, unexplained illnesses, and emotional setbacks. Followers were told that Garnett faced serious medical challenges. They were also told that his father had died. The story generated sympathy, it generated attention, it generated support. But in January 2014, the public narrative began to fall apart. On January 17, 2014, Garnett was taken to Nyack Hospital in New York. His mother reported concerning symptoms. He was admitted for observation. Inside the hospital, staff monitored him closely. What they saw did not match the story told online. Garnett appeared active, alert, playful. He did not present as medically fragile during observation. However, medical staff noticed a troubling pattern. After private moments between mother and child, his condition would suddenly decline. These changes did not follow a normal medical course. They did not align with any diagnosed illness. Laboratory tests revealed extreme sodium levels in his blood. The numbers rose rapidly to levels specialists recognized as incompatible with normal bodily processes. This was not dehydration. It was not a minor imbalance. It was severe. Doctors struggled to understand how it was happening. One physician noted that the clinical picture did not match the reported history. As Garnett was transferred to a specialized children's hospital for advanced care, authorities began investigating. Inside the family's residence, materials connected to Garnett's feeding equipment were examined. Tests showed unusually high sodium content. Medical experts later concluded that substances had been introduced directly through his feeding system. This method bypassed natural protective responses. Garnett did not know what was happening. He relied on trust. Their further investigation dismantled the online story piece by piece. The claim that his father had died was false. He was alive but had been removed from the narrative to increase sympathy. Online posts had requested prayers and support. At the same time, private internet searches focused on sodium exposure and its medical effects. The pattern was clear. In court, the case was presented as medical child abuse, formerly known as factitious disorder imposed on another. The jury rejected attempts to shift responsibility to medical providers. In March 2015, Lacey Spears was convicted of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. The courtroom addressed the legal responsibility. But the deeper issue extended beyond one family. For years, Garnett's condition had been framed as rare and mysterious. Frequent relocations and changes in healthcare providers allowed concerns to move from one place to another without full resolution. Each move reset the timeline. Each new provider relied on prior records. When caregiver accounts conflict with medical findings, that conflict must be examined carefully. Attention directed more toward public validation than toward a child's well-being is a warning sign. Garnett's life existed in two versions. One version was online, carefully written, structured for sympathy. The other version was inside hospital rooms, where doctors saw a different reality. Behind every post was a real child. Behind every update was a 5-year-old who depended on honesty from the adult responsible for him. This case raises difficult questions about digital storytelling. When illness becomes identity, when attention becomes reward, when sympathy becomes currency, medical deception does not always appear dramatic at first. It may present as devotion, as tireless caregiving, as constant updates. But when a child's physical condition repeatedly contradicts medical logic, those contradictions matter. Verification saves lives. Garnett Spears was not a symbol. He was not a storyline. He was 5. He deserved a childhood defined by school, friends, and play, not by hospital admissions and controlled narratives. The legal system delivered a sentence in 2015. But the lesson extends further. Digital platforms amplify stories quickly. Sympathy spreads faster than scrutiny. When a caregiver's version of events does not align with medical evidence, the discrepancy must be addressed without delay. Garnett's trust was complete. When children do not question the adults who feed them, they assume safety. When that assumption is violated, the consequences are irreversible. Garnett Spears' story stands as a reminder that care must be verified, not just displayed. Case 3. The Cleansing of Maline Tavarez. Maline Tavarez was 6 years old. At that age, children still look to their parents for answers to simple questions. They follow instructions. They trust without hesitation. Maline lived with her mother in Cypress Hills, Brooklyn. In the winter of 2025, the apartment they shared became the center of a tragedy that began hours before emergency services were called. On Friday, February 7th, 2025, around 4 a.m., neighbors reported hearing loud distress coming from the apartment near Elton Street and Ridgewood Avenue. The sounds were strong enough that multiple residents took notice. This was not the first time authorities had been alerted to concerns. Law enforcement had reportedly visited the residence twice earlier that same week, and those visits did not lead to removal or immediate intervention. Hours passed. Around 1:30 p.m., emergency services were called again. This time, it was for an unresponsive child. Officers arrived and found Maline in the bathroom. She was transported to Brookdale Hospital Medical Center. Medical teams attempted life-saving measures. She was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. She was 6. Maline's mother, 26-year-old Carla Espinal, was taken into custody at the scene. According to investigators, she stated that she had been performing what she described as a religious act intended to cleanse her child. Authorities determined that what occurred was not symbolic or ceremonial. It was a prolonged physical event that placed the child in extreme danger. Medical observations indicated that Maline experienced intense physical distress before losing consciousness. This contradicted any suggestion of voluntary participation or peaceful intent. The legal system treated the incident as a criminal matter. Carla Espinal was charged with second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, and acting in a manner harmful to a child. She was held without bail and placed under medical observation pending a psychiatric evaluation. The charges reflected the severity of the event. The impact reached beyond the apartment walls. Maline's father was at work at the time. He learned of the incident later through a message sent to his employer. He expressed shock and confusion, struggling to process what had happened to his daughter. In this case, warning signs had surfaced earlier in the week. Neighbors heard distress. Authorities responded more than once. Concerns existed before the final emergency call, but the pattern did not escalate into protective action in time. When belief language shifts toward physical intervention involving a child, that shift requires attention. Faith can guide families. It can offer strength during hardship. But when actions move from belief into harm, the distinction must be clear. A child cannot assess whether an adult's actions are safe, and they cannot separate spiritual language from physical risk. They depend on other adults to recognize danger. This case forces difficult reflection. When authorities respond to repeated calls, how closely are patterns reviewed? When distress is heard more than once, what determines the threshold for removal? When a caregiver frames actions in spiritual terms, how quickly does scrutiny follow? Faith does not exempt behavior from safety standards. Any action that places a child in danger must be treated as a matter of protection. Maline's life ended after hours of escalating concern. The signs were audible. The visits had occurred. But the protective response did not come soon enough. Belief systems can offer comfort. They can provide structure. They must never justify physical harm. The legal process will continue to determine final outcomes as medical findings are reviewed. But one truth remains unchanged. Maline was 6. She relied on the adults in her life to protect her. When repeated distress is reported inside a home, that is not a private matter. It is a call for decisive action. This case reminds us that early signs are often present before tragedy reaches its final point. That the question is whether they are treated with urgency. Case 4. The Girl Who Begged, Shalom Guifarro. Shalom Guifarro was 9 years old. At 9, children begin to form strong opinions. They build friendships. They find comfort in familiar routines. Neighbors remembered Shalom as cheerful and playful. She loved dolls. She brought warmth into the spaces she entered. Her home was in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. On the morning of Sunday, May 15, 2022, what began as a household disagreement escalated into a tragedy. The conflict reportedly started around 8 a.m. inside a 4th-floor apartment on Lincoln Place. The issue centered on a missing electronic tablet. According to court records, Shalom's mother, 48-year-old Shemaine Coe, reacted with extreme anger, and both Shalom and her 13-year-old sister were subjected to harsh physical punishment over an extended period. As the situation intensified, Shalom attempted to protect herself. She hid beneath her bed. Hiding is not defiance. It is fear. Prosecutors later stated the Coe followed Shalom into the bedroom and attempted to pull her from under the bed. During that effort, the heavy bed frame shifted and collapsed. It struck Shalom. Medical findings confirmed that she sustained severe trauma as a result of the impact. But what followed troubled investigators just as deeply as the injury itself. Shalom remained conscious and called out for help. No emergency services were called. No immediate attempt was made to lift the bed or seek medical care. Hours passed. It was not until approximately 1 p.m. was that Shalom's older sister was able to leave the apartment and contact authorities. When officers arrived, Shalom was deceased. Her sister was transported to the hospital for treatment of injuries and emotional shock. She had witnessed the loss of her sibling. In the days that followed, neighbors came forward. They described frequent yelling and disturbances inside the home. Police records showed multiple prior visits to the apartment. Many of those visits were categorized as domestic disputes unrelated to child welfare. As a result, no active child protective case was open at the time. The pattern had been audible, but it hadn't been classified as danger. Shemaine Coe was initially charged with second-degree murder. In October 2023, she pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. In December 2023, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison, where the court addressed criminal responsibility. But the pattern leading up to that morning deserves attention. Homes known for repeated shouting are sometimes dismissed as stressful but ordinary. Noise becomes background. Neighbors adapt. Reports are logged. But high-intensity anger inside a household can signal risk. When yelling becomes routine, it is easy to normalize it. When silence follows hours of conflict, it should not be assumed to mean calm. Shalom asked for help. Her voice was present. It was not answered in time. This case highlights what can be called the auditory witness. Repeated sounds of distress that are heard, but not treated as urgent. Police visits had occurred before May 15th. But without direct classification as child endangerment, escalation did not follow. Patterns matter. Frequent domestic disturbances involving children should trigger careful review. Children living in environments marked by sustained anger are vulnerable to rapid escalation. Shalom was 9. She should have felt safe in her bedroom. Instead, she hid beneath her bed. Fear inside a home is not discipline. It is a signal. When signs repeat, they require more than documentation. They require action. Case 5. The Flower Girl, Julie Sorella. Julie Sorella was 8 years old. She used a wheelchair. She lived with cerebral palsy. But to her family, she was defined by more than a diagnosis. She was warm. She smiled easily. She brought joy into the rooms she entered. On July 23, 2011, Julie was preparing for what should have been one of the happiest days of her childhood. She had been chosen as the flower girl for her uncle's wedding. Her dress was ready. Family members were gathering. The church was filling with guests. But as the ceremony time approached in Plainview, New York, one detail stood out. The pew reserved for Julie and her mother, 31-year-old Veronica Sorella, remained empty. Concern grew. Julie's uncle, drove to the family home to check on them. He expected a delay, perhaps a last-minute complication. And inside the quiet house, he found Julie unresponsive in a bedroom. Nearby was Veronica, also unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately. Veronica regained consciousness. She gave investigators an explanation. She said Julie's condition had suddenly worsened after eating candy that may have contained peanuts. Julie had a severe peanut allergy. Veronica stated that she attempted emergency care, but became overwhelmed when her daughter did not recover. At first, the account suggested a tragic accident, a sudden allergic reaction, a mother in distress. But medical findings did not support that version of events. Examinations revealed no evidence of peanut exposure. Toxicology reports showed no presence of the medications Veronica said she had administered. The explanation and the medical facts did not match. Scheidt's investigators continued to examine the evidence. A handwritten note was discovered. In it, Veronica described her actions as an attempt to give her daughter peace. The language expressed a belief that Julie would be better off beyond this life. The note indicated intention, not accident. Nearly 4 years later, in May 2015, Veronica Sorella pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The legal process addressed the act itself, but the broader questions centered on what had gone unspoken before that morning. Family members expressed shock. Veronica's mother-in-law, who lived in the same home, described her as devoted and tireless. She did not voice complaints. She did not ask for help. To those around her, she appeared composed and self-sufficient. Caregiving for a child with complex medical needs can be physically and emotionally demanding. But when strain is never expressed, it can remain hidden. Silence can look like strength. It can look like resilience. It can also conceal isolation. Julie depended on the adults in her life for every aspect of protection. She relied on them to manage her medical needs, to advocate for her, to make safe decisions. When a caregiver never shares emotional distress, that absence of visible struggle can delay intervention. Support systems respond to what they see. If no one sees strain, no one steps in. Julie was 8. She was preparing to walk or roll down the aisle as a flower girl. Instead, her family found her unresponsive on a morning meant for celebration. This case illustrates the risk of unspoken burden. Caregivers under long-term pressure need support, even if they do not ask for it. Praise for endurance should not replace active check-ins. When a parent carries everything alone, the risk grows quietly. The legal sentence addressed accountability, but the lesson is broader. Strength is not the absence of struggle, and when caregiving pressure builds without relief, intervention must come before a breaking point. Julie's life mattered beyond her medical condition. She was not defined by her wheelchair. She was defined by her presence in the lives of those who loved her. Her story reminds us that support must be proactive, not reactive. Case 6. The Silent Cry. Gabriel Ortiz-Fisher. Gabriel Ortiz-Fisher was 20 months old. At that age, children are just beginning to form clear words. They reach for objects. They learn by touch. Now they depend fully on the adults around them. Gabriel was in the early stage of toddlerhood. On the afternoon of March 30th, 2015, he was with his mother inside a diner on 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. It was around 2:20 p.m. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd. Orders moved in and out of the kitchen. Conversations blended into the background. At some point, Gabriel's mother, 35-year-old Ortiz-Fisher, entered a single-occupancy restroom with him. Time passed. Staff noticed that the restroom had been occupied for an extended period. Concern grew. Employees unlocked the door using a master key. Inside, they found Ortiz-Fisher seated and holding Gabriel. He was unresponsive and showing signs of medical distress. Staff immediately contacted emergency services and attempted life-saving measures while waiting for paramedics. Gabriel was transported to Bellevue Hospital Center. Medical teams worked to stabilize him. He was pronounced deceased. He was 20 months old. According to first responders, Ortiz-Fisher appeared emotionally disconnected during the emergency response. When questioned later that afternoon, she made statements using religious language to describe her actions. Those statements prompted further review of her mental health history. Court records revealed that Fisher had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia several years earlier, following a serious incident involving a family member. At that time, she reported intrusive thoughts and auditory disturbances. Rather than long-term incarceration, she was placed into a structured mental health treatment program designed to support rehabilitation and reintegration. For a period, that program appeared effective. She complied with treatment requirements. She attended classes. Providers described her as stable. She was raising Gabriel independently. But in the months leading up to March 30th, 2015, people in her community observed changes. Her behavior became increasingly unusual. There was disengagement from surroundings. She adopted unconventional spiritual practices. Neighbors noted that she appeared distant at times. Despite these shifts, no immediate protective action occurred. After Gabriel's death, Ortiz-Fisher was charged with second-degree murder. In October 2017, she entered a plea agreement, pleading guilty to first-degree manslaughter. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison. During sentencing, she expressed remorse and acknowledged her love for her son. The legal system addressed criminal responsibility, but the broader lesson centers on how stability is measured. In mental health systems, progress is often tracked through compliance, appointments attended, medication taken, forms completed. On paper, Ortiz-Fisher appeared stable, but stability is not static. Behavioral shifts can signal risk long before crisis occurs. Withdrawal, changes in belief patterns, disengagement from community. When those changes appear in someone with a documented psychiatric history, they require immediate attention. Gabriel's safety depended on continued observation beyond checklists. Compliance alone cannot guarantee protection. He was 20 months old. He relied completely on adult judgment. This case underscores a hard truth. Progress must be monitored in real time, not only through scheduled evaluations. Mental health recovery is not permanent once achieved. It requires ongoing vigilance. When warning signs resurface, systems must respond quickly. Gabriel's life ended inside a public place in the middle of the day. The signs were present beforehand. But they were not acted on with urgency. A child cannot monitor a caregiver's mental state. They cannot request intervention. They trust. Gabriel trusted. Julia, Garnett, Maline, Shalom, Julie, Gabriel. 6 names, 6 children. Each depended on the adults closest to them. Each case followed a pattern. Warning signs appeared before the final moment. Confinement inside a home. Medical narratives that did not match evidence, repeated distress calls, sustained anger inside a household, caregiver isolation, shifts in mental health stability. The legal system responded in each case. Charges were filed. Sentences were imposed. But court decisions come after loss. They do not restore birthdays. They do not restore school mornings. They do not restore futures. We close this episode by remembering the children first. Their names matter more than the crimes attached to them. Their lives were not case files. They were sons and daughters. They were siblings. They were students. They were loved. And these cases share a common lesson. Warning signs are rarely invisible. They appear in patterns. They repeat. They grow clearer over time. A teacher raises concern. A neighbor hears distress. A doctor sees inconsistencies. A family member notices silence. When those signs align, action must follow. Protection is not suspicion. It is responsibility. Communities do not need certainty to act. They need awareness. If something feels wrong, it deserves review. If a pattern repeats, it deserves attention. Silence inside a home does not always mean safety. Public appearances do not always reflect private conditions. Compliance on paper does not always equal stability in practice. Caregiving without support can become dangerous. Anger left unchecked can escalate quickly. Faith language cannot justify harm. Its medical narratives must match medical evidence. These are not abstract lessons. They are practical ones. Julia was 6. Garnett was 5. Maline was 6. Shalom was 9. Julie was 8. Gabriel was 20 months old. They relied on adults to notice when something was wrong. The responsibility does not belong to one person alone. It belongs to systems. It belongs to communities. It belongs to each of us when we see or hear something that does not sit right. Justice addresses crime. Awareness prevents it. If this episode leaves you with anything, let it be this. Pay attention to patterns. Take repeated concerns seriously. Support caregivers before strain becomes crisis, and never assume that silence means safety. We remember these 6 children by learning from their stories. Thank you for watching. And thank you for being part of a community that chooses awareness over indifference.